What if I told you that people have been needlessly suffering and dying from diseases like cancer, AIDS, Lyme disease, and a virtually endless list of viral and bacterial infections? What if I told you that an inexpensive and effective chemical remedy exists, and that remedy has been silenced, falsely discredited, and hidden from the world? What if I told you that there was undeniable evidence as well as countless testimonies of its safe use and powerful effectiveness? Would you be willing to learn the truth? The news media calls it a poisonous bleach, and the Food and Drug Administration says that it's a dangerous toxic chemical and harmful to humans. Yet not long ago, NASA researchers proclaimed it to be a universal antidote, and more recently, thousands of physicians in Central and South America have used it with 100% effectiveness against COVID-19. In 2015, I stumbled upon information about an alleged miracle supplement called MMS, or Miracle Mineral Solution. I'm a critical care nurse, and I've worked in the healthcare field for 25 years. I've seen a lot of snake oil salesmen in my time, and I'm always skeptical when I hear of any medicine that is called a miracle, and it has been my strongly held belief that if something is too good to be true, it usually is. I was promptly scared away from MMS after watching a documentary on YouTube called The Church of Bleach. This documentary, along with several others, was designed to scare people away from this substance and make anyone who would consider using it seem to be the member of a cult group at best, or end up with death by poisoning at worst. It was not until 3 years later, in early 2018, that my eyes would be open to the truth of what this miracle mineral supplement was all about. From this point forward, I'll refer to MMS as chlorine dioxide, its proper chemical name. I would like to start by telling you how I was first introduced to chlorine dioxide. A friend of mine came to visit in early 2016. She told me about someone she knew who had spent over a decade in Africa doing missionary work and helping people with all kinds of health problems. She gave me his number and said I should give him a call and talk to him about his experiences. I gave Dave the missionary a call. I've changed his name in order to protect his missionary work in Africa, so I spent about 20 minutes on the phone with Dave. That was in 2016. I really didn't get much out of the conversation at the time because I didn't know much about the topics and alternative remedies that he was talking about. He told me about his use of what he called MMS, its amazing effectiveness, and how he was helping people in some of the poorest regions of Africa. About a year and a half later, in 2018, I ran across a video titled Quantum Leap. This video was a documentary that included interviews with people who had been cured of both minor and serious diseases using MMS. After spending 25 years in the healthcare field as a nurse, I was very skeptical and found it incredibly difficult to believe that so many people had been cured by a single substance. However, as I watched, my mind raced back to the conversation with Dave, the missionary, and the pieces began to fall together. I called my friend back and got Dave's phone number. It just so happened that he was back in the US on leave from his missionary work in Africa, and I was able to contact him. Dave and I again talked on the phone for about 30 minutes. The stories of cured diseases were very similar to the stories that were related in the Quantum Leap video. That conversation set me on a 2-year journey to discover the truth of chlorine dioxide for myself. Over the next 2 years, I set out to prove to myself once and for all if this substance was truly a miracle or truly the poison that the mainstream media was making it out to be. I read hundreds of scientific papers, research articles, and patent applications. I listened to well over 100 personal video testimonies, and I watched every anti-chlorine dioxide video that I could get my hands on. I really wanted to know if there were legitimate and well-founded arguments against the use of chlorine dioxide. I took notes, screen-captured comments, downloaded video testimonies, and joined forums so that I could personally communicate with those using chlorine dioxide. In this video, I want to share my 2-year journey of discovery with you so that you can save yourself some time and effort. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do your own research, but I'm saying that I've done a significant amount of unbiased research, and I was willing to go either way with regard to accepting the claims of chlorine dioxide. I wasn't committed to proving the substance true, but as a healthcare provider, I've always been committed to finding things that help people get well and then educating people about those things. As I jumped right into my search for the truth, I had questions that I needed answered. My questions about chlorine dioxide and their answers are summed up in this documentary, which will be presented in 4 parts. In part 1, we'll learn what chlorine dioxide is, and we'll take a brief walk through the history of its use in the United States. Part 2 addresses the safety of chlorine dioxide for human use. In Part 3, you'll find out just how effective chlorine dioxide is and explore its wide range of uses. And Part 4 is comprised of personal testimonies from people who've experienced healing from the use of chlorine dioxide. A full review of the data collected during this journey of discovery can be found in the PDF provided in the description of this video if you're watching the original on my YouTube channel or on my Brighteon backup channel. Both channels are titled Curious Human Productions. If you copy and re-upload this video, I would ask that you would place the link to the PDF reference document in the description of your re-uploaded video. So what is chlorine dioxide and how is it used? First, let me say that chlorine dioxide has had a rich and well-spoken of history in the United States and abroad long before the media and powers that be came against it. So what made the change? Let me see if I can connect the dots through a quick review of its history here in the United States. Since its discovery in 1814 by Sir Humphrey Davy, the use of chlorine dioxide has slowly grown, and it's now used in a wide range of industries. Its use has significantly increased since the late 1970s. Chlorine dioxide is registered as a sterilizer and biocide and is used to sterilize medical facilities and laboratories, including BSL-3 and BSL-4 labs, which handle the world's most deadly pathogens. Chlorine dioxide is a biocide. This means that it kills all bacteria, viruses, and fungus on contact through a process of oxidization. It has many applications from the food and beverage industry, where it's used as an antimicrobial agent for washing foods, cleaning produce, and disinfecting liquids. It's used in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry for contamination control and sterility. Hospitals, schools, and daycares use it as a sterilizing disinfectant to prevent dangerous pathogens like MRSA, coronavirus, and mold spores. Chlorine dioxide is used for municipal water purification and has become the gold standard because it's safe for human consumption, non-carcinogenic, and non-mutagenic. Chlorine dioxide is a gas and must be produced at the time of use. The most common and simple method for producing chlorine dioxide gas is a process of mixing sodium chlorite and an acid activator. When these two substances are mixed, chlorine dioxide gas forms. The gas is a very simple and tiny molecule and contains 1 chlorine atom and 2 oxygen atoms. It's extremely soluble in water and does not create chemical bonds. This means that the gas can be dissolved entirely in water. Because of this property, it can be used to safely and effectively purify water while completely deactivating viruses, bacteria, fungi, and some types of small parasites. It even neutralizes many toxins, pesticides, herbicides, and pharmaceuticals that contaminate drinking water. As an added bonus, it can do all of that without producing any harmful organic compounds, as occurs with nearly all other disinfectants. Industries that rely on chlorine dioxide for disinfecting properties include agriculture, healthcare, food and beverage, waterworks, and air quality, just to name a few. Up until the 1970s, chlorine dioxide was primarily used on a small scale for water disinfection, but failed to gain early and widespread use because of the inexpensive but more toxic chlorine bleach, which had been used for drinking water disinfection since the 1920s. Howard Alger, an inventor, scientist, and businessman, first discovered the beneficial effects of chlorine dioxide for not only human and animal health, but for almost anything that involves killing bacteria, viruses, and fungi. He made this discovery while searching for a non-corrosive sterilizer that could be used with a product that he had helped develop and sell called the Sonicator. This work led him to experiment with chlorine dioxide as a sterilizer with part of his system. He discovered a formulation for a simple method of generating chlorine dioxide using sodium chlorite and an acid activator. The method worked perfectly with his Sonicator, He patented the chemical process and named it Alcide. He then discovered that the chemical worked just as well for sterilization without the ultrasonic device. He took his patented process and chemical formulation for producing the chlorine dioxide and formed a company around it using the same name, Alcide Corporation. Alcide Corporation went on to produce multiple patents and products that utilized the antimicrobial and healing effects of chlorine dioxide. Alcide Corporation had patents for treating wound disinfection, donated human blood and blood component disinfection, an oral rinse for prevention and treatment of infection, formulations for anti-inflammatory diseases including psoriasis, fungal infections, eczema, dandruff, acne, genital herpes, and leg ulcers. Other products included topical applications for preventing and treating bacterial infections, including udder mastitis in mammals. Also under development were systemic anti-inflammatory formulations and methods for reducing inflammation in tissues such as bowel, muscle, bone, tendon, and joints. Methods also were developed and patented for preventing and treating microbial infections in the lower genital tract of mammals. These included the treatment of vulvitis, vaginitis, cervicitis, and endometriitis, which involved an intravaginal and/or an intrauterine infusion. Apart from the applications for human and animal use, Alcide Corporation also received multiple patents that utilized chlorine dioxide for the treatment and disinfection of food and beverages, the disinfection of surfaces for industrial, healthcare, agriculture, and more. Alcide Corporation went public in 1983, and for reasons unknown, Howard soon sold his share of the company and parted ways. When Howard left the company, he had to sign a no-compete agreement with Alcide Corporation, which prevented him from developing chlorine dioxide products. Remarkably, in 1994, at the age of 66, he started the company Arco Research and began his work with chlorine dioxide again after the no-compete agreement had expired. In 2004, Arco Research became Frontier Pharmaceutical and has continued to expand and develop chlorine dioxide products for human use, and before his death at 92 years of age, Mr. Alger even patented a method for treating cancer with chlorine dioxide injections. Also, in 2004, the multi-billion-dollar company Ecolab acquired Alcide Corporation. The CEO of Ecolab at the time stated, quote, "We believe the transaction of Alcide is attractively priced for Alcide shareholders and will allow Alcide to accelerate growth for its products and improve opportunities for its employees." After Ecolab purchased Alcide, research and development for human applications of chlorine dioxide seems to have stopped, and Alcide products were rebranded with a strong focus on industrial and agricultural use. Now let's step back in time a bit to 1996. It was at this point where the course of chlorine dioxide took a very interesting turn with the coincidental discovery of a common yet eccentric gold miner by the name of Jim Humble. In the summer of 1996, Jim Humble was hired to lead a mining expedition through the jungles of South America. During the expedition, 2 of the men on his crew were bitten by mosquitoes and became very ill with what they thought was malaria. They had no anti-malarial medication and were 2 days away from any help. Jim had brought bottles of stabilized oxygen. Stabilized oxygen is a liquid solution of sodium chloride that is used to purify water. Since sodium chloride is used to purify water, Jim thought that it might help rid them of the pathogen that was causing their illness. He gave his companions some of the stabilized oxygen, and within hours, the men were back on their feet, feeling completely well. This raised some questions in Jim's mind. Did this water purifier really kill the malaria? The malaria parasite infects and kills over 1 million people each year. This was the beginning of Jim's search to understand what had happened. He began successfully experimenting with his mixture of stabilized oxygen on himself and the local natives who had contracted malaria. Jim later discovered for himself that when the sodium chloride solution comes into contact with stomach acid or any acid, it produces a substance called chlorine dioxide. Jim would later discover that chlorine dioxide cured much more than malaria. Over the next decade, Jim spent a significant amount of time experimenting on himself using chlorine dioxide and ultimately helped people in some of the poorest regions of the world, including South America, Mexico, and several African countries. He was using chlorine dioxide to cure malaria, typhoid fever, dengue fever, HIV, and other serious diseases. In 2006, Jim published his first book titled The Miracle Mineral Supplement of the 21st Century. It was in this book that Mr. Humble recounted the story of his initial discovery, subsequent self-experimentation, and adventures discovering the healing benefits of chlorine dioxide. He also gave detailed instructions for anyone to inexpensively prepare this substance for themselves. Over the next few years, chlorine dioxide, or what came to be known as MMS, became an internet sensation, and many people began to share how they were being helped by this substance. Internet chat groups formed, and other early social networks began to develop and spread through the news of its benefits. From 2006 to 2010, the human use and popularity of chlorine dioxide under the name MMS continued to grow, and it was in 2010 that a government and media campaign began in order to deter people from using chlorine dioxide. The media and FDA reported that chlorine dioxide was a poisonous bleach and its consumption could result in injury or death. From 2010 up until the current year of 2020, the mainstream media and the FDA have continued their relentless attack on the human use of chlorine dioxide and anyone who would promote its use in the treatment of human disease. Now let's think about this critically for a moment. From the mid-1970s to 2010, a wide range of industries have been using and developing chlorine dioxide products without any media outcry and without any FDA warnings about this being a toxic or poisonous bleach. Then, when it's discovered that anyone can safely make and use chlorine dioxide to cure a broad range of human diseases without a doctor, the FDA and the mainstream media begin a fear campaign against chlorine dioxide to scare humanity away from this simple yet amazing substance. Are you beginning to see the picture? They can't ban the substance because it's so widely used in so many industries. Chlorine dioxide has been available for human and animal use since the 1970s, but it was when a common old gold miner by the name of Jim Humble discovered how easy it was to make and treat yourself with chlorine dioxide that the establishment comes out with false information and misleading scare tactics to keep people from personally experiencing the power of chlorine dioxide for themselves. There's so much more that I would like to add with regard to the historical review, but we'll have to save that for another video. So now that we've summed up a brief review of the history, let's move on to our first question. Is chlorine dioxide safe for human use? Let's stop there for a minute and talk about bleach. It's true that chlorine dioxide is used in the paper industry as a bleaching agent, and this is where much of the controversy arises. The anti-chlorine dioxide crowd has one argument and one argument only against chlorine dioxide.
The FDA says the ingredients inside are incredibly dangerous.
Essentially, it's a powerful bleach that could poison anyone who drinks it.
To treat everything from cancer to AIDS to autism, but you shouldn't drink it because drinking bleach, as you might guess, isn't good for you.
Aims basically turn into bleach in your stomach.
Is like consuming bleach and is dangerous to your health.
It's bleach.
This argument is simply propaganda. Here's why. As a nurse, I regularly give my patients dangerous substances like Coumadin, a blood thinner which is used as rat poison, chemotherapy, some of which are used as chemical weapons, and salt water for hydration, which is a poison in high concentrations. All of these substances can be beneficial for humans, but can also be highly toxic and even cause death when given in large amounts or inappropriately. The toxicity has everything to do with the dose amount, and it has nothing to do with the label placed on the substance. The same is true for chlorine dioxide. For chlorine dioxide to be used as a bleaching agent, the solution concentration will be on average 5%. Dosing used for human health ranges from 0.000003% to 0.02% solution. When chlorine dioxide is used appropriately in the minuscule quantities required to eliminate pathogens and benefit human health, it's totally safe. So the bleach propaganda argument, which initially scared me away from chlorine dioxide, is completely invalid with reference to how chlorine dioxide is used for internal and external human use. Here's a quote from Scottmas Group, experts in the field of chlorine dioxide disinfection. Quote, While chlorine dioxide has chlorine in its name, its chemistry is radically different from that of chlorine. As we all learned in high school chemistry, we can mix two compounds and create a third that bears little resemblance with its parents. For instance, by mixing 2 parts of hydrogen gas with 1 of oxygen, liquid water is formed. We should not be misled by the fact that chlorine and chlorine dioxide share a word in common. The chemistries of the 2 compounds are completely different. So now, let's dig into safety. Is chlorine dioxide safe? The answer to this question is yes and no. Yes, it's safe if it's used appropriately, and no, it's not safe if it's used inappropriately. This is true for any chemical, medicine, or substance that is applied to the human body. Because of chlorine dioxide's safe track record, it's used widely as a water purifier and is being used as a safe decontaminant in many industries, including the food and beverage, medical, agricultural, pharmaceutical, and sanitation. Any place where you need to kill all of the bacteria, fungus, and viruses, chlorine dioxide is becoming known as the safest and most effective choice available. Chlorine dioxide was used to safely sterilize the Senate offices after an anthrax attack in Washington, D.C. in 2001, and it has been used to safely clean up Ebola virus hot zones. When used appropriately, chlorine dioxide is safe and is one of the few chemicals that does not harm the environment. Precautions and discretion should be used as would be appropriate with any chemical, medication, herb, or substance used for medical purposes. There are a number of different ways that the users of chlorine dioxide introduce this substance onto and into their bodies. The primary methods of use include topical and oral consumption. For the purposes of this discussion about safety, I'm going to cover the methods that are commonly tested in the scientific research literature, which include oral consumption, inhalation, and ophthalmic. One of the main reasons why chlorine dioxide is replacing chlorine bleach in many water treatment facilities is because its byproducts do not react with organic compounds in the same way as chlorine bleach. The byproducts of chlorine dioxide are safe and not harmful for human consumption. Safety studies performed since the 1970s have shown that chlorine dioxide, when used appropriately, is safe for human consumption. More recent animal studies have also helped to identify safe levels of chlorine dioxide for oral and inhalation use. Let's look at a few of those studies. In 2017, a safety study was performed using mice. Part of this study was performed in order to determine the safety and efficacy of chlorine dioxide when inhaled and taken orally. The conclusion for the inhaled chlorine dioxide was that compared to the control group, quote, inhalation of 10 and 20 parts per million of chlorine dioxide for a full straight 24-hour period did not cause irritation in the mice, and there was no significant difference between the control and the test group. In the same study, the conclusion for the oral dosing of chlorine dioxide was, quote, in the subchronic oral toxicity test, 0, 5, 10, 20, and 40 parts per million chlorine dioxide was prepared to feed mice. Clinical observations of the mice showed no abnormality and no mortality after 90 days for the control and test groups. Administration of up to 40 parts per million chlorine dioxide to mice for 90 days is non-toxic. And again, in the same study, 50 parts per million showed no significant symptoms in a rabbit ophthalmic eye irritation test. In another animal study, 100 milligrams per liter, which is 100 parts per million chlorine dioxide, was added to every liter of drinking water for 30 days, and toxicity on blood components was evaluated. They evaluated a wide range of blood parameters, and they found no significant effects on any of these parameters. In one study, human volunteers drank chlorine dioxide in solution up to 20 parts per million, and it showed no adverse side effects. In another study from 1979, honeybees, which are usually very susceptible to any toxicity, were fed high doses of 10 to 100 parts per million chlorine dioxide in their water supply and showed no ill effects. And not only that, when the concentration was kept between 10 and 100 parts per million, this significantly increased the longevity of the bees. In another study, rats were exposed continuously to inhaled chlorine dioxide at 0.05 parts per million or 0.1 parts per million for 24 hours a day and 7 days a week for 6 months. The study concluded that gas up to 0.1 parts per million exposed to the whole body in rats continuously for 6 months was non-toxic. These rats breathed low concentrations for 6 months continuously and had no adverse side effects. In another study performed in Japan, school children had a significantly reduced incidence of absenteeism during a period when low concentrations of chlorine dioxide were dispersed throughout the classroom. These children were being exposed to safe levels of chlorine dioxide and received the benefit of fewer sick days. According to the Centers for Disease Control, chlorine dioxide is not mutagenic or carcinogenic in humans. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, in a study carried out in 1981, 198 people were exposed to 5 parts per million chlorine dioxide for 3 months, and the EPA researchers failed to identify any significant exposure-related effects when compared to the control group of 118 people. Another study was carried out on chlorine dioxide and its metabolites in 1982, and this was the conclusion, quote, "Within the limits of the study, the relative safety of oral ingestion of chlorine dioxide and its metabolites, chlorite and chlorate, was demonstrated by the absence of detrimental physiological response." On page 1 of the EPA completed review of chlorine dioxide, it states, quote, "At this time, products containing chlorine dioxide and sodium chlorite are intended for agricultural, commercial, industrial, medical, and residential use." On page 2, it states, quote, "Chlorine dioxide and sodium chlorite do not appear to produce toxic metabolites produced by other substances." To exemplify just how safe chlorine dioxide is, the pharmaceutical company Frontier Pharmaceuticals has produced a variety of FDA-approved safe products containing chlorine dioxide that include an oral rinse and skincare products, and the founder of the company, Howard Alger, even has a patent for using chlorine dioxide to eliminate cancer. The patent states the following, quote, "Chlorine dioxide, a strong oxidant, can safely be injected into a subject's body, including a tumor, although the compound has not yet been utilized as a cancer treatment in this manner." It goes on to say, quote, "Chlorine dioxide is highly penetrating and generally considered non-toxic, as demonstrated by its application in deep wounds, third-degree burns, and use in oral and topical diseases." Citations are given for research papers that validate this statement. These can be found in the PDF document listed in the description of this documentary. There are dozens of research papers that extol the benefits and safety of properly applied chlorine dioxide for human wound management and microbial control. In 2014, the Journal of Advances in Skin and Wound Care published an article that stated, quote, "Chlorine dioxide appears to be a safe, biologically acceptable antiseptic wound irrigant that does not appear to interfere with cosmetic outcomes." And from the International Dentistry Journal, published in 2004, it states, quote, "The effectiveness of topical chlorine dioxide, 0.8%, in the management of chronic atrophic candidiasis was demonstrated. Chlorine dioxide provided a safe and clinically effective option." And just so you understand what a 0.8% solution is, let me illustrate. 0.8% when converted to parts per million equals 8,000 parts per million. The typical oral dosing that people use when ingesting chlorine dioxide orally is less than 100 parts per million, and typically less than 50 parts per million. So as an oral rinse, chlorine dioxide was safe and clinically effective at a dose 80 times greater than what is used to receive the beneficial effects through oral ingestion. Chlorine dioxide is even being used medically for the treatment of cancer in France. French physician Laurent Schwartz has been treating patients using a protocol that includes chlorine dioxide. The literature can be reviewed at cancertreatmentjournal.com. When typical users ingest chlorine dioxide by mouth, they're going to be consuming mixtures that range from about 10 parts per million to 100 parts per million. so the range of dosing is within or just slightly above the doses that showed no abnormality and no mortality after 90 days of chronic daily use in the animal studies previously mentioned. Thousands of people, including myself, have experimentally consumed chlorine dioxide for months at a time within the 10 to 100 parts per million dose range. I'm not stating that long-term chronic daily use is recommended. I'm just stating that people have performed long-term chronic daily use experiments without harm. Like any good medicine, chlorine dioxide should be used appropriately to help restore and improve human health. A full review of all of the documents mentioned in this safety section can be found through the link in the description of this documentary. In summary, when used appropriately in the low doses required to neutralize pathogens, chlorine dioxide has been proven safe. When used inappropriately in high doses, chlorine dioxide can be dangerous and it must be used with caution. The third question that I needed answered as I began my research into chlorine dioxide was, is chlorine dioxide effective for destroying pathogens including viruses, bacteria, and fungus, and producing beneficial oxidative effects? And to be more specific, is it effective at doing this with direct human application both outside and inside the body? Let's first look at the evidence for the overall effectiveness of chlorine dioxide's ability to kill viruses, bacteria, and fungus, and then we'll take a look at the effectiveness with regard to human application. One thing you have to keep in mind with regard to effectiveness studies is that to my knowledge, in the United States, there have been no started or completed human trials authorized by the existing medical establishment for the internal use of chlorine dioxide with any virus, bacteria, or fungus, and there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of research projects into its external and disinfectant use. Fortunately, there have been a few unofficial, remarkable human studies completed, and we live in the digital age where it's almost impossible to completely eliminate information. Unfortunately, instead of embracing the incredible results and jumping into action with more studies, the results were quickly discredited and buried after the powers that be classified them as never happening or unauthorized. So let's get started looking into the in vitro research. To start, here's a quote from the Encyclopedia of Food Microbiology, 2nd edition, 2014. Quote, "Chlorine dioxide is 3 to 4 times as powerful as sodium hypochlorite as a sanitizing agent and is generally effective against all bacteria and viruses." This is from the Travel and Tropical Medicine Manual, 5th edition, 2017. Quote, "Chlorine dioxide is capable of inactivating most waterborne pathogens, including Cryptosporidium, at practical doses and contact times. It is at least as effective a bactericide as chlorine, and in many cases superior. It's far superior as a viricide." From the International Travel and Health Guide, 2006 to 2007, 13th edition, it says, quote, "Chlorine dioxide is an extremely effective disinfectant, which rapidly kills bacteria, viruses, and giardia, and is also effective against Cryptosporidium. Chlorine dioxide also improves taste and odor, destroys sulfides, cyanides, and phenols, controls algae, and neutralizes iron and manganese ions. It's an effective biocide at concentrations as low as 0.1 parts per million and over a wide pH range. It is 10 times more soluble in water than chlorine, even in cold water. Unlike iodine, chlorine dioxide has no adverse effects on thyroid function. Chlorine dioxide is widely used by municipal water treatment facilities. The term chlorine dioxide is misleading because chlorine is not the active element. Chlorine dioxide is an oxidizing, not a chlorinating agent. Chlorine dioxide penetrates the cell wall and reacts with amino acids in the cytoplasm within the cell, killing the microorganism. The byproduct of this reaction is chlorite, which is harmless to humans. In the same study mentioned earlier that looked at oral, inhaled, and ophthalmic safety limits, the researchers found that, quote, "Antimicrobial activity in vitro was more than 98.2% reduced when concentrations of chlorine dioxide were 5 and 20 parts per million for bacteria and fungi respectively." It stated, quote, "Excellent antimicrobial activity was observed for both bacteria and fungi. Also in this study, antiviral inhibition was examined for H1N1, influenza B, and enterovirus 71, and there was a greater than 50% inhibitory effect within a 2-minute exposure to 100 parts per million of chlorine dioxide. It's important to note that this safety and effectiveness study was specifically being carried out because chlorine dioxide solution can be and is directly applied to food and human hygiene products and for preventative health measures. In other words, they know it works extremely well on the outside, and they wanted to make sure that it was safe for internal use because it's so effective against all pathogens. In a 2010 study, chlorine dioxide at concentrations ranging from 1 to 100 parts per million produced potent antiviral activity, inactivating greater than 99.9% of viruses with a 15-second treatment for sensitization. The antiviral activity of chlorine dioxide was approximately 10 times higher than that of sodium hypochlorite, which is standard bleach. In a 2008 study of the influenza A virus infection, a randomized controlled trial was performed with mice and yielded the following amazing results. 10 mice were exposed to aerosolized influenza A and aerosolized chlorine dioxide at 0.03 parts per million simultaneously for 15 minutes. A control group of 10 mice were exposed to only the aerosolized influenza A for 15 minutes. 16 days after exposure, none of the mice exposed to the chlorine dioxide influenza A group had died, but 7 out of 10 mice in the influenza-only control group died. That's a 70% fatality for the mice that did not receive aerosolized chlorine dioxide. Did you catch that? Extremely low doses of chlorine dioxide protected 100% of those mice from influenza. Chlorine dioxide outperforms other disinfectants and is safer than any other. In this study, 11 disinfectants were put to the test against some of the most common and harmful bacteria. Chlorine dioxide had the highest biocidal activity out of all 11. Chlorine dioxide inactivates HIV in vitro. In a 1993 study, chlorine dioxide inactivated HIV-1 in the presence of blood and in the presence of medical supplies. Chlorine dioxide is also effective at inactivating and destroying human papillomavirus, or HPV. 5 of the most common bacterial pathogens have been tested against chlorine dioxide, and here are some of the results. 5 parts per million of chlorine dioxide in water decreased E. coli by 99.999% in 60 seconds. Acinetobacter baumannii, a multi-drug-resistant bacteria which can cause pneumonia and meningitis, was killed by chlorine dioxide at 100 parts per million in 60 seconds. Salmonella typhimurium, the bacteria which causes typhoid fever, was killed off by a 10-minute exposure to 5 parts per million chlorine dioxide gas. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is a drug-resistant bacteria that causes pneumonia, was completely killed by exposure to 10 parts per million of chlorine dioxide for 60 seconds. Chlorine dioxide is a certified biocide, and here's a running list of microorganisms, which includes bacteria, viruses, and fungi that it's known to inactivate. There are many more studies on the efficient destroying power of chlorine dioxide, and those studies can be found through a link in the description to a PDF handbook for chlorine dioxide references. The incredible power and potency of chlorine dioxide to destroy pathogens that cause human suffering and misery cannot be overstated. Now, let's take a look at the available research for chlorine dioxide for direct external and internal human application, along with some interesting animal studies. In a Japanese study that looked at continuous use of extremely low concentrations of chlorine dioxide, school children were exposed to 0.01 to 0.03 parts per million in the air continuously, and there was a significant decline in student absenteeism during the 38-day trial period. And this strongly suggests the usefulness of extremely low concentration chlorine dioxide gas to prevent respiratory viral diseases. Chlorine dioxide is recognized as a biocompatible wound antiseptic irrigant. This means that it can be used in human and animal wounds to help reduce infection and inflammation without causing any type of irritation or negative effects on routine healing. In fact, chlorine dioxide products have been shown to significantly improve wound healing time in animal studies. As a side note, treatment of deep surgical wounds with chlorine dioxide has also taken place, and the results have been quite remarkable. Chlorine dioxide has shown to be completely safe and biocompatible, and there was significant improvement in wound healing outcomes. In this study, they also proposed an interesting theory for the cause of the beneficial effects that chlorine dioxide brought to these serious wounds. Studies have been carried out by Frontier Pharmaceuticals with their chlorine dioxide products for the treatment of non-healing diabetic ulcers with striking results. Multiple studies have been carried out on the use of chlorine dioxide for oral health, and several products have been developed by different companies which utilize it as a post-surgical oral rinse and general use oral rinse to treat periodontal disease, oral infections, canker sores, bad breath, and more. Frontier Pharmaceuticals, the company that was founded by Howard Alger, offers a whole line of chlorine dioxide products for external and oral rinse use. They have products that cure toenail fungus, canker sores, oral infections, and chronic sinus infections. Candida albicans is a big problem when it comes to fungal overgrowth caused by antibiotic overuse and denture use in the elderly. This overgrowth can cause significant human health problems. In a pilot study of oral candida, chlorine dioxide provided a safe and clinically effective option in the management of chronic candidiasis. A research study on dairy cows with a chlorous acid chlorine dioxide teat dip showed a reduced incidence of Staph aureus infection of the udder by over 90%. In the preliminary clinical trial that took place in 1982, a physician stated that Alcide, which is a patented form of chlorine dioxide, induced prompt remission of oral herpes symptoms and rapid resolution of lesions in 15 of 16 cases. These patients have had no reoccurrence in 6 months. Also, 5 of the 6 patients with genital herpes had prompt remission and no reoccurrence. In 2012, a study took place in Uganda. The International Red Cross, Uganda Red Cross, and a group called the Water Reference Center had members present that conducted the study and documented the results. In the study, 154 people tested positive for malaria, and 154 people were cured of malaria within 48 hours. After the study was conducted by the local Red Cross, the International Red Cross authorities denied that the entire thing took place and refused to verify the results. The study was documented on video by several people, and these videos have made their way online. Unfortunately, the malaria study documentary has been banned multiple times from YouTube, but can be found on alternative video platforms like Brighteon and BitChute, and those links are provided in the PDF document that you can find in the description of this video. In a more recent preliminary trial, 100 patients with serious illness from COVID-19 were cured within 48 hours of use of chlorine dioxide. These preliminary studies were carried out in the country of Ecuador by licensed physicians who were desperate to find a true solution for so many of the serious COVID-19 patients that were dying by the hundreds. One brave doctor first cured himself using chlorine dioxide, and then after several other doctors recovered with chlorine dioxide, it was offered as an alternative treatment with consent to severe cases. All 100 patients that participated had significant improvement within 48 hours and achieved a complete recovery. This preliminary study was carried out with the assistance of biophysicist Andreas Kalker, who has been a longtime advocate of chlorine dioxide and speaks internationally on the subject. One of my main purposes in showing you all of this research data is to help you see the contrast between what you see coming from the mainstream news sources saying that chlorine dioxide is a toxic bleach, and the reality that chlorine dioxide is a safe, powerful, and effective substance. Here you have a substance that anyone can make or buy, and when used appropriately, it can bring health and healing where nothing else can. You can literally make enough of this to last a lifetime for less than $100, and it has been known to cure everything from the common cold to cancer. Do you remember Howard Alger, the guy that founded Alcide Corporation and Frontier Pharmaceuticals, he filed a patent in 2017 that utilizes chlorine dioxide to cure cancer. In the patent information, he provides experimental research that was performed with mice that showed complete tumor regression within 48 hours of injection. That's right, it killed cancer tumors in less than 48 hours. As I said previously, the internal human use studies are few and far between, but the same cannot be said for the anecdotal reports from all over the world. From written testimony reports to video testimonies, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of reports. Many of these have been banned from media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Google. The locations of these testimonies can be found in the PDF document found in the description of this video. There has been a quietly growing grassroots movement of people using chlorine dioxide to self-treat disease, and they've been using chlorine dioxide to cure a wide range of infectious diseases, including antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections, malaria, influenza, hepatitis, and more. Others have had some remarkable results relieving diseases such as arthritis, cancer, and other inflammatory diseases. Time and my own personal limitations to perform interviews and compile interview data prevents me from chronicling the thousands of stories that I could compile. Here are some recent interviews and stories that I've compiled, but this doesn't even scratch the surface as to the alleviation of human suffering that chlorine dioxide has brought to the world. Earlier in this documentary, I mentioned Dave, who's a missionary to Africa and has been helping people with chlorine dioxide since 2007. In May of 2020, I was able to interview Dave over video chat. Here are some clips from that interview. The entire interview can also be found on my Brighteon backup channel and also on my BitChute backup channel.
I was in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa for 10 years, where we had the clinic, but then I was in Kenya and Uganda. I've been there the last couple years, and I've used it over there.
Tell me how you first came into contact with MMS.
I knew that I wanted to go to Africa. I've always been interested in natural medicine. I knew how good on paper MMS was. So we call it MMS or chlorine dioxide, whatever term you like. So then once I got to Africa, I had it with me, but I had never really used it. I think I used it maybe once or twice here in America. But I got to Africa, I got malaria right away within 10 days. And then I almost died from the malaria. I was really sick. And so I tried conventional pharmaceutical medicine for about 10 days, and I wasn't getting any better. My vision was starting to get really bad, my hearing, because of the drugs that they inject or you take for malaria, the pharmaceuticals. So after about 10 days, I realized at 2 in the morning that I had to try something different. So I mixed up some MMS, drank it, tasted terrible, but within an hour to an hour and a half, I was sleeping normally. My nausea was gone, headache. I mean, all of these things that I'd had, the temperature, had a high temperature. So I got really well very quickly. And so I woke up the next morning feeling great. So the next day, I thought, man, this is great for malaria. So I found 13 Africans, gave it to them. Almost everybody in that village has malaria, chronic malaria, or they're having a bout of it. I gave it to 13 within 2 came back, and they just said, this is the best medicine we've ever taken for malaria.
What year was that?
That was 2007.
Wow. Okay.
West Africa, Guinea-Bissau. Experience. We tested people before and after blood test for falciparum, malaria. But I tested 33 before and after, and it was 100% accurate. And then we had probably another 50 or 70. We had a lot more people that tested on their own, but MMS worked within hours, 2 or 3 hours, 100% of the time.
For malaria.
But for malaria, yeah. So I ended up getting typhoid. My blood pressure dropped to about 85/45. So after taking it for typhoid fever, right away. Within a day or two, bowel function starts returning. Your blood pressure starts returning. But it's incredible for malaria and typhoid fever. We saw people with fungal infections from their head, their scalp, all the way down to their feet, just crazy infections. And they've been that way for 10 years.
Oh.
And we would make sure we got it on every square inch of their body, from sometimes their face, their scalp, their whole body. We put it on with a paintbrush or spray it on with a spray bottle.
Right.
But we would make sure very, very thorough, and it was 100%. We never had anybody come back and say, the rash is continuing or the itch is still there. Very effective.
Have you ever seen MMS cause harm when using the doses that you used?
Never. We've treated probably 70 to 100,000 people for malaria and typhoid. I've never seen an adverse reaction. I've seen people vomit, especially if they're very, very sick. And in little children, I would usually give them a little bit more medicine, a drop or two more than that is probably necessary, because so many times the kids are on the verge of dying. So I'd rather see them vomit, because even though they vomit, they get well so incredibly quick. Maybe the medicine's only in their stomach for 5 minutes or 10 minutes before they vomit. But I've seen kids and adults on the verge of death, just ready to die. If they can sit up and drink, within an hour or two, they're on their feet. They're saying, I feel good. I did treat some people for HIV using MMS and colloidal silver with really great results. But the problem is most countries over in Africa, because they're influenced by the FDA, they don't allow it. But I've seen CD4, CD8 numbers come up right away. They tested negatively for the virus. But that's very limited, because I've only had to do it on the download with some people. It was pretty unique. You'd see the same thing every time you go into the communities. You'd go into a tribe, 100% Muslims, and I'd always do it the same way. I'd say, we want to bring the Bible and tell you about Nebi Isa, about Propheta or Jesus. And so they'd always say, have tea with us. You can talk to us, but you'll never talk to the people in our village. We're going to protect them from the Bible. So then I'd always switch gears, going through translators, but I'd always say, we want to treat people in your community. We'll treat everyone that comes tomorrow morning. And we would treat anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people. They come. We treat them with a megaphone, kind of in an expedited way. If you have these symptoms of malaria, stand under that mango tree. But we would treat a lot of patients in one day. And by the end of the first day, the people felt so good that the leaders would always say, hey, come and sit down, tea with us. And I knew what they were going to say, because they'd say, if you bring that medicine into our community, primarily MMS, if you bring that medicine into our community, we'll give you the land. As long as you have a clinic in our village, we'll give you the land. We'll help you build it. You buy the cement, you buy the roof. But apart from that, they would just say everything is free. There's no problems. Sometimes they'd have a radio station, and they'd say, if you come and bring that medicine, you can even use the radio station. You have to pay for the broadcast time. You can teach about Jesus and the Bible on the radio. So it was great, because it lowers all barriers. Whenever you go into them, initially extremely high walls. Once you treat them, everything is gone. The door's wide open to doing ministry. So I've always been extremely cautious, because in that community, when we opened the clinic in the capital city in Guinea-Bissau, in that community, if you treat somebody and there's an adverse effect, or if somebody dies, you will sometimes face death yourself. The police are not going to come. The Minister of Health is not going to shut you down. The family will come and kill you, or a mob will form and kill you right away.
In this next interview, you'll meet Steve. In his early 20s, he had chronic illness that resulted in 2 open-heart surgeries and multiple cases of pneumonia. In March of 2020, he had contracted what appeared to be a severe case of COVID-19. He relates his initial discovery of chlorine dioxide and his rapid recovery from severe illness.
I'm a commercial lawyer. I'm an investment fund solicitor, financial services solicitor in the UK. So yeah, I've been a lawyer for 20 years practicing.
Tell me a little bit about how you first heard about chlorine dioxide and what led you to use it for the first time.
Certainly. So it was March of this year, 2020, when I became sort of desperately unwell with a lot of the familiar signs of COVID-19. Extreme breathless problems. I had sort of rashes on my hands. I had discoloration of my fingers and my toes. I just felt incredibly unwell. Diarrhea, weird chills, and I ended up, it sort of progressed over a space of about 4, 5, 6 days to the point where I ended up going to the A&E, which is Accident and Emergency in the UK. They weren't able to test me for COVID because of that stage, the UK didn't have the necessary testing facilities. Not even doctors could be tested. But they said, you're exhibiting essentially COVID symptoms. You have a virus. You most likely have it. Just go home, isolate. But they said, to the extent you deteriorate to such a degree that you have a real problem breathing, please call an ambulance. I was sent home at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. And I think, throughout the challenges I've had medically, I've never felt as though I was losing that battle. Whereas this, I felt I was really in trouble. And out of desperation, I reached out to a friend who actually lives in Kenya. And she said, have you heard of MMS or chlorine dioxide? I said, absolutely. I said, no. She said, well, I think it can help you potentially. And she had a friend in the UK who she said she could hopefully get hold of this individual and he could get it to me. He dropped off, this package for me and then gave me instructions about what to do. And I obviously had Googled what it was in the sort of few hours I was waiting to see him. And, the hits that came up were, you're drinking bleach, it's highly dangerous. And I thought this sounds like a horrific idea. But to be honest, I was just so incredibly unwell and desperate. So I started with a few activated drops that evening, and then I sort of ramped up over the following day. 36 hours sticks in my brain as I can't believe I feel so much better. And I imagine it was probably a progressive thing. But I remember looking back where thinking I was thinking this was it. And then 36 hours, I was like, I cannot believe I've just dodged a bullet. And what is this amazing substance that I've been taking?
This is Anna. Anna struggled with debilitating Lyme disease for months before she discovered chlorine dioxide. She was bedridden and unable to walk and is on her way to a full recovery.
Basically, what I want to share is my experience with MMS because it is a miracle. 3-4 weeks ago, I was bedridden in this room, unable to walk with stage 3 chronic Lyme disease, with EBV and other co-infections. And so unable to walk, really, like bedridden. I couldn't go for water or go to the bathroom. Unable to think and speak properly, unable to hold a spoon and eat for more than 2 seconds. Like when I was holding my spoon for more than 2 seconds, I got such a strong pain. I was in pain the whole day, in very, very strong pain and brain fog. I wanted to just end things. Seriously, it was such a hell. It was a hell on earth. My body in muscle pain, in nerve pain, my blanket was, I felt like it has 1,000 kilograms, I had these weird pressures all over my body, and it was never ending. Every day some new symptom. Every day I felt more and more like I'm going to go crazy and die, and so on. I was taking antibiotics, didn't do a thing for me. Before that I tried many herbal stuff, didn't do a thing for me. Then when I was dying, my friend and I was texting to my best friend I don't think this is going to end well. And I couldn't even hold my phone, I was texting one word and then I had to put it down, and then I was texting another word because the nerve pain was so strong. Horrible, guys. And she was like, oh, I feel like I need to tell you that my father is taking MMS, and for example his friend cured cancer with it, and I feel like it is very questionable and there are a lot of weird articles, so I don't know if you're in, but just wanted to share. So since the day one, I was better. My anxiety was immediately better. And then it started to slowly, I'm taking it extremely slowly. Right now I'm on 2 drops in the morning and then 1 drop 7 times a day. So I don't want a Herxheimer reaction. So I'm taking things extremely slowly. And I still have amazing results. Like my nerve pain is gone. I can walk here. I'm like, a lot of the symptoms are still here, like fatigue, vertigo and dizziness and so on, but a lot of symptoms are completely gone. At least I feel like a decent human being. I feel like I can function in this world, and the best thing is that it's getting better every day. Of course, it's like 3 steps forwards, 2 steps back. MMS is the only thing I take right now. I really skipped all my herbal things, or like vitamin C, things like that, vitamin D, B, all the things. I just like put it in my drawer, and all I have on my table is MMS, and that's everything. So it has to be MMS, yeah? There's no way how you can explain this thing to me than with the fact that MMS is working. Okay, so that's it. If you guys have any question, feel free to ask. Hi guys, so today we have a very nice weather in Czech Republic. The sun is shining like crazy. I'm just in my t-shirt and wow, and this is the longest walk I've been walking in months. I just put my cat to the vet. I hope put is good word. And I decided that I'm going to walk because I'm usually right now I'm using Ubers because I had such a problems with walking. So it's not just that it was physically bad, but also I had strong anxiety and agoraphobia and so on because I felt so bad in my body because of all the symptoms from Lyme disease. And right now I'm walking and it feels fucking awesome to be able to go somewhere.
In this next video, you'll meet Lindsay Wagner. Lindsay Wagner is an actress who you might recognize from the 1970s TV series called The Bionic Woman. She suffered from a severe skin disease that modern medicine could not fix. Her discovery of chlorine dioxide and her rapid healing are a true testimony to this chemical wonder.
Earlier today, we updated you on an Eyewitness News investigation that began more than a year ago on the Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing, which sells a medicine touted as a miracle cure for anything from HIV to cancer.
And while many, including the FDA, are calling MMS poison, we spoke with one woman who says it works, and you may be surprised to learn who it is. Eyewitness News reporter Jory Rand is here with that exclusive interview. Jory.
Mark, Michelle, we're talking about a substance known as MMS. You can find it online, and many people have. The problem is many others, including the FDA, say it's not medicine at all. It's just bleach. But we found a woman who says it worked for her, and you may know her as the Bionic Woman. As the Bionic Woman, actress Lindsay Wagner found herself in some difficult situations and was able to pull off superhuman feats. Joined at times by the $6 million man, Wagner's character saved lives and saved the day. None of that 70s TV magic prepared Wagner for an ailment she would suffer in real life, a case of chronic urticaria, severe disabling hives.
All over my body, like welts, like big welts. I looked like a boxer. My eyes were all swollen.
Steroids and antihistamines helped, but they had side effects and weren't a permanent solution. So after 8 months of suffering, Lindsay was desperate for a cure.
It would burn, it would itch like crazy. It's something that could just make you go insane.
Through a friend, Lindsay was put in touch with a woman whose child seemed to be nearly cured of severe autism by something called Miracle Mineral Solution, or MMS, that was purported to work for a variety of ailments, including chronic hives.
So though it was odd, I looked it up on the internet and I saw lots of good things about it, and then I saw a few scary things about it, and I thought, I didn't care. Honestly, I was desperate and I went, I'm trying this.
MMS is made with sodium chlorite, an ingredient in many industrial cleaners, and it's the religious sacrament of the Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing. Its leaders, Jim Humble and Mark Grennan, self-proclaimed archbishops who claim MMS can cure anything from cancer to the common cold.
Are you telling people you can cure breast cancer with this?
We tell people to cure a lot of things.
Aren't you just a con man?
Well, I don't think so.
Critics, including the FDA, say MMS is nothing more than industrial-strength bleach. But for Lindsay,
I was dumbfounded. Within a week, I was off the prednisone. Within 1 week, I was just shocked.
She says within weeks, the hives disappeared and never came back.
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist, but it just seemed like this had actually cured whatever I was reacting to.
People are saying this is bleach. You know, it's basically, it can be used as a cleaner or something like that, and people are putting it in their bodies.
So can vodka. I dropped a bottle of vodka on my grandmother's kitchen floor once, and it was vinyl. It was this nice dark brown vinyl, and there's a huge tan spot in the middle of it. So, you know, that's kind of silly. A lot of things we ingest can do a lot of bizarre things.
I could not make this documentary without mentioning the Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing. They have been instrumental in helping thousands of people from all around the world to learn about and receive the beneficial effects of properly used chlorine dioxide. In spite of an incessant disinformation campaign, along with overwhelming persecution and harassment, they have continued to proclaim the truth about chlorine dioxide, and they've also produced many instructional videos that help common people learn to make and use chlorine dioxide. They've also produced hundreds of short video testimonials of people from all around the world. These video testimonials have provided a voice for each individual person to share about their healing experience and have served as a verifying record as to the effectiveness and healing power of chlorine dioxide. However, most, if not all of them, have been banned, deleted, and erased from all major media platforms. The PDF in the description of this video will provide you with link references where you can find all of these video testimonies as well as instructional videos for making and using chlorine dioxide for yourself. For the purposes of this documentary, I'm going to provide just a few clips of some of these video testimonies to give you an idea of the wide range of disease processes that chlorine dioxide has helped. I am aware that all of these reports are simply anecdotal testimonies of people's experiences. If there were just a couple of them, they would not be convincing. However, after you watch hundreds of videos and read hundreds of written testimonies, there has to be some point at which anecdotal evidence leads to common sense deductions.
So I started to take it, and after 3 days, I felt, in my case, it wasn't tingling. It was like a lining in my left breast, something like came like this. So I started to check my breast, and it was always a little bit bigger, this left breast, bigger than the right one. So it always came out of the brassiere, the bra, and I found these side products, they were cysts.
Cysts?
Yeah, they went away really fast taking the MMS. By the second week, those weren't there anymore.
I was diagnosed with HPV. I didn't know I was diagnosed with HPV. I went to the doctor for every year for normal pap smear, and they told me, well, you've got abnormal cells, but don't worry about it. It should go away on its own. Come back next year and we'll test again. And that was back in 2015. On or about 2017, I was just filing some papers and came across my after visit summary and noticed that. And I've got documents to prove it. HPV, I don't know if you can zoom in on this, but I've got HPV and atherosclerosis, high cholesterol, you name it, I have it. So they told me that HPV could not be cured. There's no cure for it. Here's some medication, and we can do a lead procedure. 3 years later, it got really worse, and I noticed the symptoms in my underwear. I mean, I hate to say this. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but the truth is the truth. It was acidy. A discharge that was coming out was burning through my underwear, and I didn't know what that was. And all the time, they're telling me, don't worry about it. Everything's okay. Just come back next year. Anyway, I'm searching HPV and cures and natural cures, and looking through YouTube, I found Jim Humble and then Mark Brennan and MMS, the cure. So I started using the MMS. I started with 3 drops of MMS and 3 drops of the activator, and I took that every hour on the hour for like 3 days. After 3 days, the stain and the burning just disappeared, and on the 4th day, I felt better. I had a lot of energy. They called me from the hospital and told me, "Oh, based on your history, we have to test you again. Come on." And I thought, great, let me find out where I'm at. So I took the test, and I have the testimony here, document. I'm going to give this to you guys so that you can see HPV test.
It was negative.
Negative. So
What is that date? 8/14.
yeah, just before I came here, I took the test and
a staph infection in my uterus, and they wanted to put me on heavy antibiotics, which I didn't want to do. And so I got in touch with my good friend, and she's a big proponent of MMS, and she was making CDS and highly recommended it for me for this issue. So I was taking it, I think I did it for 3 or, I can't remember, it's 3 weeks or a bit longer. And I was taking it every hour orally, and I was also doing enemas. Douches every evening. I was trying to do it twice a day, but mostly it was just in the evening.
You had the problem in the uterus?
Yes.
Staph infection?
Inside my uterus, yeah.
Okay. A lot of pain,
A lot of pains. I was feeling very fatigued. I couldn't ride in cars on bumpy roads. It was a lot of lower
discharge.
pain. Yes, exactly.
A lot of infections. So, staph infection in the uterus. And so after you did that 3 weeks, what happened?
I just started feeling better. I did the entire protocol as recommended and was feeling better pretty much with about halfway to a little bit longer. And all the symptoms just went away. And
how long ago was that?
That's 8 months ago.
So 8 months, she's symptom free.
My hand was shattered. They had put pins in, and then they were like this since 1990. And then it was 4 weeks after I started all that, I can straighten my hand.
And you mean you had fixing hair like that the whole time? Wow. So you must feel like a new life, huh?
Yeah.
8 years ago, I was a missionary pilot. A long time before that, but 8 years ago, in Dominican Republic in Haiti, we were working with doctors from different places, from Johns Hopkins to different hospitals around the world. They come down, and these doctors would spend their vacations and help us operating on people with hernias. You know, you've seen those big hernias on children and things like that. More like a mechanic, helping fix some problems, and really good people. And I really appreciate them sacrificing their time. But during that time, myself and my children contracted MRSA, which is a staph infection that it's a flesh-eating bacteria, that just goes crazy through your body. And most people get it in a hospital. So it's a known fact that many people die of this. What really concerned me, not just having it, is my children having it. And we had at that time the best antibiotics known to man from these surgeons. I mean, really expensive ones. One injection would last a week after they operate on people to keep infection out of their body. We tried everything, didn't touch it. Big boils, you'll see later on what it looks like, but big boils throughout your body. My second son, Jonathan, was playing baseball in the Dominican Republic, and he got it on his leg. And the surgeons told me, if it gets much worse, because he was these big boils, we're going to have to cut off his leg to save his life. I told my son that, and he's like, Dad, that ain't going to happen. I'll die first, So I went on this quest into the internet. Thank God for the internet. I went on this quest looking for natural cures, because the pharmaceuticals weren't doing it, for MRSA. Ran across this book saying something about a miracle and didn't really think about it. Kept looking. I wanted a lot of facts and proof, and kept coming back to this book talking about a miracle. And they offered the book free, the first half, so I read it, and I'm like, it makes a lot of sense. Let me get the rest of the book, and let me get this stuff. And make a long story short, I got it, tried it, make sure it wouldn't kill me before I gave it to my kids. And no problem. Back then we were taking a lot stronger. I got a little diarrhea, but got rid of my MRSA. Started giving it to my children. Within 6 months, the whole family's clean. And that was 8 of my children. I have 8 children. The only one that didn't get it was my wife. And some people just don't get it. Some people have a good immune system. They just don't get it. So after doing that, I'm like, wow, this stuff really works. You know, I'm going to start telling the neighborhood. I'm in Dominican Republic. I'm around near Haiti. I'm around all these different people from elephantitis to HIV to high blood pressure to strokes. We start giving it to the people. I start learning how to make it. And all these people are getting better.
This is Maggie. Maggie's partner first introduced her to chlorine dioxide in 2019, and she thought he was crazy. He had previously discovered chlorine dioxide when working to restore his own health after a battle with some serious health conditions. In February of 2020, Maggie and her partner became extremely ill with respiratory symptoms. They both began taking chlorine dioxide and had a rapid recovery from their illness. This was the beginning of Maggie's healing journey. She's overcoming chronic sinus infections, chronic fatigue, herpes, and more. A link to the full interview is in the PDF document.
My name is Maggie Stern. I'm 52 years old. I learned about chlorine dioxide, or MMS, last fall from my roommate. He is an ex-elite athlete. He's 54 years old, big time, like ranked cross-country skier, skate skier. And he had gone through a huge health crisis maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And then he went down all the rabbit holes on alternative health. And he has a chemistry background. His undergraduate degree is chemistry, and then he's a mechanical engineer. And he had heard about MMS in all his going down rabbit holes. We call each other roommates. He's divorced, I'm divorced, but we are partners romantically also. So we got together last summer, and I told him I have genital herpes. You know, very upfront about it. I mean, I've had it for approximately 25, 26 years. And right away he said, hey, this is how it came up. I know this stuff, MMS, and it's supposed to cure herpes. And of course I'm like, dude, there is no cure for herpes. There's no cure for herpes. My only thing is to not give it to anyone else. Then I read Wikipedia. I'm reading all this stuff about MMS. I'm seeing stuff with Jim Humble and this church and these archbishops. I mean, I am really getting the negative propaganda, and I'm totally negative about it. There's no cure for herpes. My mom is a registered nurse. My grandmother was the head registered nurse at a hospital nearby. You know, I've got some medical. My best friend is an MD, John Hopkins. So I've got these people in my life. I ask them about it. They're like, this is snake oil. Nothing cures all this. There's no cure for herpes, basically in a nutshell. There's no cure for these diseases. For Christmas, he buys me a bag of sodium chloride flakes. That's what I get for my Christmas present. Sodium chloride flake. Meanwhile, we get a guest who comes here from Corsica. His buddy, who's also a retired elite athlete, who is sick like he has never been sick in his life. We didn't find out until like months later that Corsica, which is an island off of France, has COVID. He had the whole thing, the scratchy sore throat, the headache. It progressed to this bizarre pressure congestion in his head. It was in his lungs. Within a couple weeks after him leaving, Dale gets sick. Within 2 or 3 days after him getting sick, I had it too, like this weird, scratchy sore throat and just a headache and kind of malaise. I'm like, I'm sick too. I closed my store down and we got in my RV. I have a little RV, and we headed south, even though both of us were unwell. Within a few days of being on the road, it moved into our lungs. And we would cough and cough and cough and cough and cough and cough. Dale he's sick, but he's in better health than me, and he hasn't had the chronic issues, lung issues than I. So he's doing better. He's like, I'm going to make MMS. He's got sodium chloride. I don't want to go to the emergency room. All they can do is give me antibiotics at that point. He mixed the swimming pool water, as I called it. It was disgusting. We did a 3-drop activated dose every hour. Every hour we were awake. We weren't doing the 8 hours. We were doing it, hitting it hard. The next day, he's already seen an improvement. He's feeling better. Dale was definitely better, and I was slower to recover, but I started recovering. We got back on the road. We were headed to Florida to stay with my aunt, and we took our time getting there because whatever we had, we wanted to make sure we didn't give to her. She's elderly and compromised already. By the time we got down there, all we had was, I had fatigue.
Okay, yeah. So let's sidetrack for just a minute. So February was the pneumonia or the illness that you had. Yes. When did this staph infection occur?
That occurred around the 1st of June.
Okay.
And it was
what happened?
June.
How did you get this staph infection?
So what happened is I was out harvesting wild plants in the woods. I had my Teva sports sandals on, and the strap on my sandal did a mild, very superficial abrasion on my ankle. Superficial, little scuff mark. I ignored it. Kind of itched and picked. A couple days went by, and I was just ignoring it, busy. It's a little scuff. Maybe a couple days went by, and I'm like, dang, this thing is really bothering me. And I put iodine is always my go-to. Like, I put iodine on it and put a Band-Aid on it, and then forgot about it again for another day. And when I lifted the Band-Aid off, all the flesh where the scuff was actually a little hole. And the flesh around the hole was swollen and really loose. It wasn't like tightly seated down to my foot anymore. It almost like the whole thing lifted when I pulled the Band-Aid off. I'm like, what the heck is this now? So then I go online and I look up, because Dale is like, that's a staph infection. I'm like, this is serious. I couldn't even put weight down on my foot at this point. But I pounded it with MMS the first couple days. I gassed it, topical, and then I religiously went back on Protocol 1000. I was doing 3 drops a day, every hour, from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep. And when the staph was really acute and really I couldn't even put weight on my foot, I was waking up with an alarm, like a timer every hour. I dosed all night for maybe a day or two. But I stayed on it. I was on it several days, and when I was totally confident that it was healing, then I told my mom, the RN, who puts the fear of God in me. I said, it's getting better. I'm watching it. Meanwhile, I haven't had a herpes outbreak.
Okay, now we're going to get into the issue with herpes.
Yeah.
So first of all, how often were you having herpes outbreaks?
I would have one maybe every 2 months. Mild. They weren't real severe.
From January, when you started taking chlorine dioxide, to...
Now it's June.
Okay.
And I still haven't had an outbreak.
Since January. So 6 months has gone by, and that's not typical.
That is not typical.
June came around, the staph infection. You haven't had any herpes outbreaks since January when you started using chlorine dioxide. Now we're at October. So what's going on with regard to the herpes? You said it was every 2 months.
So I literally was like, I think I'm cured. I don't have herpes anymore. But I had my herpes outbreak always came in the same place, on my butt cheek, my left butt cheek. And I had a little tiny bump, and I'm like, at first I felt like, oh no, I think I'm going to have a herpes outbreak. And that means I'm not cured, and I actually scratched it. I irritated intentionally, trying to bring it to a surface. And no prodromals, no nerve pain down my leg. It was the mildest outbreak, but it was a herpes outbreak. And this was maybe a couple months ago. It would be maybe August or September, sound about right. So this is where I'm at with right now, presently today. I feel my relationship with chlorine dioxide now is with the molecule ClO2. I love it. That little chlorine atom and those 2 oxygen atoms, I'm like reverse engineering myself. So using Protocol 1000 has dialed me through. I had chronic sinus sinus issues, and all of that has opened up and drained. So my singing voice is better. You know, I've just got reverb going on in my head where it's been just plugged and congested. Bladder issues, I had leaky bladder, and that's been going on for about a year. Like every time I had to pee, by the time I got to the toilet, I'd already leaked a few drops. And I just thought it was just aging. Gone. I have bladder control like a 20-year-old again. And that is chlorine dioxide. There's nothing else that has changed in my life. To tell, it does seem miraculous. I feel my energy level. I get up at 7 in the morning. I go to bed at 10 or 11 at night with no naps, no chronic fatigue. My head is so much more clear.
So you used to always take naps and you used to always be chronically fatigued.
I would wake up in the morning at 9. I never got up before 9. I opened my business up at noon because I literally I've created my own business around my chronic fatigue so that I can, if I have, and even when I had my own salon, I would usually schedule a 2 or 3 hour break in the afternoon so that I could go home, eat lunch, and take a nap for an hour and a half. With Dale, he uses chlorine dioxide. He's not on Protocol 1000. He did it though for a while. He drinks a dose before he goes for a hard run, and after he gets home from a hard run. He has no lactic acid buildup in his body. His muscles don't get sore and contracted. And he had compartmentalized syndrome in his calf. He couldn't run. He'd run 50 yards and it would cramp up so bad and stay painful to the point where he thought his running career was over. So we are all seeing, people who are really unhealthy are seeing benefit, and people who are healthy are seeing like they're youthing. And then I get all fired up about it because I feel hopeful for all of humanity, but I feel hopeful for my own personal future and my family's future.
A mass awakening also occurred in June 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of its successful use by multiple doctors in South America, the country of Bolivia authorized the legal use of chlorine dioxide for the treatment of COVID-19. Physicians were allowed to provide their patients with a voluntary option to receive chlorine dioxide as an oral treatment. The astounding testimonies and stories of people's recovery from severe COVID-19 began to flow into Spanish media outlets, and these testimonies started appearing on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms. As quickly as they appeared, they began to be censored. Here's a collection of short video testimonies of both physicians and patients.
I am an orthopedic surgeon. I have special degrees in pediatric orthopedic surgery and spinal surgery. At the beginning of the pandemic here at the clinic that I work in Querétaro, Mexico, we saw all the patients came in and died a few days after. So I was very concerned with this. I think I had to do something else for these patients. So I started to use the CDS, and it worked perfectly fine in all the patients. So I started with the first patient on the middle of May, and now I have more than 3,000 patients treated in a successful manner with an effectiveness of 99.6%. I am the general director of Centro Médico Jurica. It's a private clinic that has high specialty in pediatric orthopedics, spinal surgery, and other kinds of orthopedic surgery. We are not treating patients with COVID-19 here at the clinic because the authorities are not letting me treat them because they know that I use the chlorine dioxide. Whenever they knew that I was having 100% effectiveness, they came here and closed down my COVID area. We studied the first 1,000 patients, and we had that 99.6 effectiveness, and only four of them died. Inevitable, because they were in a very advanced stage when they contacted us. Under my care, I have more than 50,000 people who are taking the CDS prophylactically. We have proof of the chlorine dioxide to be 100% effective in a prophylactic way. I take 20 cc's a day, Jeff. It's my protection. I've been taking it. I started with 10, but nowadays I see a lot of patients, and I'm taking 20 cc's a day. I take 10 in the morning and 10 in the afternoon, and it's the first year that I haven't had the flu or any respiratory symptoms. We have to remind all the people and all the doctors that are treating patients that we have the Helsinki Agreement, which says that if there is no effective treatment in any emergency circumstances, which we are in right now in this pandemic, you can use as a doctor a treatment that gives hope and saves lives in patients. They have to sign a consent, a medical consent, but with the Helsinki Agreement and the medical consent, you're perfectly legally protected. You can treat patients. I treat them at their houses. I wish I could treat them here. You know, if they are in a severe stage of the disease, I want to have them here at the clinic with all the support of the nurses and the medical team. But I'm not able to do that, so I have to do that at their houses. So it's a lot more the work. I have to go to their houses and give them the treatment. I think I've been blessed by knowing the CDS in a good time. I've saved a lot of lives, and I'm very happy with that. I'm never gonna stop doing this, no matter what happens. No matter what happens. I'm a doctor, and I have principles, I have empathy, I have ethics, and I know, and I've seen thousands of patients getting better with this treatment. I'm never gonna stop using CDS in the treatment of COVID-19, no matter what happens.
Soy Patricia Callisperis, traumatóloga pediatra, actual directora de la Clínica del Sur. Soy médico, mamá de 4 niños, esposa. El dióxido de cloro ha sido un descubrimiento en mi vida porque yo me he curado con el dióxido de cloro. Yo tenía unas lesiones bucales importantes de las cuales nadie me podía dar un buen diagnóstico. Inclusive fui a Estados Unidos, a Brasil. Tenía diferentes diagnósticos como líquen plano, Coxsackie, herpes anómalo, etc. Y tomaba 5 remedios diariamente para evitar esas lesiones, pero sin embargo igual salían. Cuando empecé a consumir el dióxido de cloro ya no tengo más lesiones bucales y me curé. Gracias a Dios tuve la suerte de estar en contacto con el doctor, un doctor en la clínica, no sé si estoy autorizada en decir su nombre, que conocía justamente un proyecto a nivel mundial donde se estaba haciendo una investigación científica con relación al coronavirus. Entonces hablé con el doctor Johanny Andrade y con el doctor Insignares, que son los médicos colombianos que están a la cabeza de las investigaciones a nivel internacional. Gracias a Insignares y al doctor Johanny Andrade tuve contacto con Andreas Kalker.
A alguna gente les puede parecer difícil o que la gente no cambia, pero sí, las cosas están cambiando, no cambian en un día, cambian gracias a todos ustedes.
Entonces tenía, como cualquier otro médico, tenía las dudas, ¿no? Porque realmente que te digan que hay una solución tan sencilla para algo que es algo tan terrible y nos los han pintado como si fuera realmente un monstruo de 200,000 cabezas, porque es así el coronavirus, y de pronto te encuentras con que un agua mineral puede curar, realmente es increíble, ¿no?
Cánceres de todos los tipos, recuperados de páncreas, de abdomen, de gástrico, etc. Que no significa que siempre es así, porque también he visto gente morir.
Logré entender básicamente cómo logra matar el virus, cómo logra mantener el cuerpo oxigenado y en un nivel alcalino ideal.
Lo que pasa, en muchísimos casos irrecuperables se está recuperando, por lo tanto, quiero resumir qué está haciendo esa sustancia. Esa sustancia está haciendo una oxidación que es precisamente el plan B del cuerpo de convertir una toxina ácida en una no toxina alcalina.
Fue así que me alisté, por así decir, al grupo de médicos que estaban yendo a Trinidad a ayudar. Yo hablé con un colega, con Fernando Arce, quien siempre me ha dado el dióxido de cloro, y él era el que fabricaba el dióxido de cloro en las noches, en el hotel, y en las mañanas íbamos a distribuir justamente a la población con ayuda de la FEJUVE, César Álvarez, Johnny Tereva, ingeniero Iñaque, y las licenciadas y un grupo de médicos. Entonces así hemos podido llegar a muchas personas.
Le quedo muy agradecido por la ayuda.
Por ayudarnos, por estar con nosotros.
En Trinidad realmente era como una película de ciencia ficción. Habían personas muriendo literalmente en sus casas. Y hemos tenido la suerte de poder salvar muchas de ellas.
Decirle que estoy bien, me he sentido bien. Gracias a la ayuda de ustedes ahora ya estoy mucho mejor.
Ya me siento más tranquila, menos fatigada.
Ahora con este suero siento que puedo respirar más tranquilo ya.
Las personas que dicen que el dióxido de cloro no funciona es porque no han tenido el privilegio de poder curar a alguien. Yo sí, yo he curado. Yo he visto cómo una persona ha salido de una hipoxemia de 60 a 80, 90 en menos de 4 horas.
Médico solidario. Me siento muy contenta por una oportunidad más de vida.
Después de 4 meses entrar al Facebook y ver comentarios como que estoy ganando plata o estoy con alguna ventaja de todo esto, no. Hemos devuelto abuelos a sus nietas, mamás a sus hijos, y esa satisfacción realmente es increíble. Entonces, ir y estar con un paciente y demostrarle que no es necesario usar una máscara y poder abrazarlo sin miedo y estar aquí viva como estoy yo ahora, yo creo que esa es una victoria y es la mejor ganancia que he podido recibir. La satisfacción de una sonrisa, la satisfacción de poner mi grano de arena en el cambio que es el cambio de la humanidad.
María Isabel Quesquem, 60 años. Empezó con mi garganta que me dolía y ya sentía algo que me atragantaba. No podía respirar, el cansancio en la espalda. No podía estar sentada porque me cansaba, tenía que estar recostada. Mi familia comenzó a preocuparse y me llevaron a la clínica. Dijeron que como había bastantes pacientes, me dieron la medicina, me regresé a mi casa, no me podían internar. Mi familia utilizó el CDI poniéndome a la vena y ahí a los 2 días comencé ya a sentirme un poquito más mejor y podía respirar y podía pararme porque a la vez no podía caminar. Y ahora estoy contenta gracias al CDI que me ha salvado mi vida. Y estoy contenta gracias que Dios me ha devuelto mi vida. Ahora yo al caminar a mis escaleras no podía caminar porque me agitaba, me cansaba. Ahora ya bajo mis escaleras, subo y baja y ya no me agito, no me duele mi corazón, me palpita nada. No me duele mi espalda porque me dolía demasiado. Gracias al CDI me salvó la vida y estoy con mis hijos y mi esposo y toda mi familia. Gracias.
En una nueva sesión de la Cámara de Senadores, con una amplia mayoría, los legisladores de esta Cámara aprobaron el proyecto de ley para la elaboración y distribución de dióxido de cloro.
Más del 60% de mi familia fue afectada por el COVID, empezando por mi madre, mi padre, mis hermanos, mis cuñadas, mis sobrinos, inclusive mi hijo. A los 2 días mi madre empeoró, no podía respirar y decidimos llevarla a la clínica, donde le detectaron que el 80% de su pulmón estaba dañado. El doctor nos indicó que esperábamos lo peor, que solamente ella podía permanecer con oxígeno y que esperábamos siempre cualquier momento, estemos preparados para cualquier momento. De ahí comenzamos a buscar alternativas. Gracias a Dios encontramos el dióxido de cloro. Esto lo ayudó a mi mamá de pasar de una saturación del 80 a una saturación del 93 a los 2 días.
Mi nombre es Raúl Gómez, tengo 61 años. Antes del COVID yo tenía una fuerte infección a la rodilla. Estaba demasiado inflamada, negra, con bastante dolor. No podía caminar ni hacer mis labores diarias. Luego me contagié del COVID, me llevaron al hospital y en el hospital me recetaron inyecciones y vi que no había mejoría. Entonces en una de esas me dijeron que muy probable era que me iban a amputar la pierna. Como no mejoraba, Ya me dolía, ya tenía demasiado fiebre, dolor de espalda, y gracias a Dios encontré el dióxido de cloro. Estoy bastante mejor, he superado mis piernas y puedo caminar tranquilo y hacer mis labores normales.
Mi nombre es Juan José Elías Valdivia, mi edad es 47 años. Los síntomas que yo empecé a tener fue una tos seca muy seguida, sumado a ello ya empecé a agitarme más constantemente. Yo sentía pues que estaba a un paso sinceramente de morir, ¿no? Porque mi situación era muy crítica. Tenía los ataques muy constantes, la falta de oxígeno que cada día que pasaba era sumamente difícil, ¿no? Empecé a tomar todo el tratamiento que normalmente recetan los médicos, que es la acitromicina, la aspirina, la prednisona, después la ivermectina, pero en mi caso particularmente yo sentí que no hacía ningún efecto porque la falta de oxígeno, los ataques de tos continuaban y para mí era realmente muy desesperante, ¿no? Bueno, cuando mi hermano ya firmó mi acta voluntaria, nos regresamos a mi domicilio y ahí empecé a ser tratado con el dióxido de cloro. Al principio, los primeros días, estuve mediante vía oral y después intravenoso. Cada día que pasaba mis síntomas eran mucho mejor, mi saturación aumentaba cada día, me sentía muy bien, tenía más apetito, ya empezaba realmente a comer porque yo estuve en un proceso muy crítico. Y como aproximadamente unos 10 días yo no ingería ningún tipo de alimento. Bajé tremendamente de peso, pero debido a este tratamiento que cada día oxigenaba más mi organismo, yo evolucionaba. Cada día me sentía mejor, respiraba ya mucho mejor, se me quitaron los ataques de tos, hablaba con mayor facilidad porque anteriormente yo no podía hablar mucho porque ahí nomás me producía los ataques de tos. O sea, en pocas palabras, el proceso que yo pasé con este dióxido de cloro para mí fue estupendo.
Janika is from Estonia and first discovered chlorine dioxide, or as she knew it, MMS, when her infant son became extremely ill and the doctors had given up and told her to prepare for the worst. This set her on a quest to find a cure for her son before it was too late.
I discovered MMS 9 years ago through my child's illness. My son was then 8 months old, and all of a sudden at the dinner table he developed breathing difficulties. He was coughing like crazy for more than half an hour and very violently, and I thought that he had swallowed something, some piece of toy or something, and in the end he was choking. He couldn't get oxygen anymore and he fell limp on my arms and turned blue in his face. We called the ambulance and they said that you cannot, waste a second here. And we got to the hospital. They did x-ray and blood tests and it appeared that there was no foreign object in his lungs, but instead he had pneumonia, which at that time I thought it's a good news. And so they started to treat him for that. But after the treatment, several weeks later, after another X-ray, it appeared that the lung, the shadow in the lungs was even wider, and the pneumonia hasn't gone anywhere. So they gave another treatment, and the same result. During 5 months period, we were hospitalized for 5 times. And when we went there, when we were at home, we had ambulance coming to our house quite frequently because of the obstructions that he had when he couldn't breathe. And in the hospital, they just gave him endless tests. They were looking for all sorts of different diseases like HIV and autoimmune diseases and cancer and 1 in a million of rare genetic diseases, and but they couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. Whatever they did, it just went worse. Several times in the hospital, the doctors came to me and said, look, we have done everything and he does not respond to any of it, so be prepared for the worst. And then I realized that I cannot hope anymore that they will have an answer. They haven't had an answer for 5 months. And if I want to save my child's life, I have to do it myself. I started to, Google days and nights on all different health forums and websites, and I stumbled upon some substance called MMS. I didn't know what it is. Several people claim that they cured, from themselves from cancer or autoimmune diseases or arthritis or whatever, and I immediately knew that must be something very powerful. So this MMS thing seemed logical to me, and I ordered the bottle. And then funny thing happened. By that time, when it arrived in my house, I hadn't been sick for more than 15 years. Everybody around me was sick with flu or whatever, and I thought I'm immune. I have reached to immunity for the rest of my life. And so I'm totally sick. I felt so awful. Actually, I fainted. And I was so worried that how can I take care of my sick child if I cannot take care of myself? I didn't know about MMS much. I only had read few chapters from Jim Hum's book, and I remembered that you should start very low. And so I think he mixed me 3 drops, the standard dose, and I took it. I didn't really, hope much, but to my utter surprise, less than an hour, I was completely well. Not just well, I was just full of energy. And I was feeling so good. And I was like, okay, this is impossible. Nothing can work that fast. Nothing in the world. But here I am. This is my experience. And so I started to give, at that moment, when I started to give my son MMS, the 4th day, I didn't sleep days and nights. I was again very worried that the problem is coming back, and I was just holding him constantly. I was afraid that in the morning when I wake up, he's dead. And on the 4th day, I became really scared because his lungs were quiet. I couldn't hear any sound anymore. So I thought, oh my God, the mucus is thick again, and we need another, this invasive bronchoscopy, and it all starts again. We rushed to the hospital, and the doctor did all the tests and said that, look, he's completely well. His lungs are clean, there is nothing, and he's healthy. And it was a substitute doctor, and she went through his medical history, and she said that, look, I really don't understand it, because everything we have tried have failed for 5 months. And now all of a sudden, for no good reason, in 4 days, he's cured. Then I was in this hallway of the hospital where we had basically lived half the time, and I just could not believe my happiness. I was beyond happy. The unbelievable relief that finally something had worked, and I found the cure. Every other time when he had whatever, small cold or coming, I did the same, and every time it took care of it in 1 day, completely.
How old is he now?
He's 10 years old.
In my 25 years of experience as a critical care nurse, I've never encountered a more amazing substance than chlorine dioxide. I hope that this documentary has helped explain why chlorine dioxide, when used appropriately, is safe, effective, and beneficial for human health and healing. And I hope that this documentary will lead to more openness from the healthcare community so that proper human trials can occur and chlorine dioxide can see its full potential for the benefit of mankind.